Well, it appears that Edgar Cayce may have been right all along. He had made predictions that there would be massive Earth changes sometime in the 21st century, and he also described the United States as being inundated with floods, especially on the east and west coast, and in the center by the Mississippi opening up into a giant chasm whereby the Great Lakes would pour into the Gulf Stream. Now, a lot of people try to assign a specific date to when this was going to happen, and they also were using the Mayan calendar, and they were saying 2012. And when it didn't happen, we all became non-believers. I'm going to try to condense even further information from the Diehold Foundation, pointing at a year 2046, which would be during the next Gleisberg cycle, which we have all scientists know that we're basically about 500 years late on the next major ice age, and it appears as if Doug Voigt of the Diehold Foundation has actually determined what causes the ice ages. The ice ages are actually caused by the sun doing a nova or a mini nova on a periodic clock cycle, which has been calculated to be 12,068 years. Many, many, many years ago, talking billions of years ago, this would have been the Earth. The Earth would have been a fireball. It would have been much closer to the sun. Every time the sun does a mini nova on a clock cycle of 12,068 years, the Earth gets pushed further and further away from the sun. Many millions and millions of years ago, or perhaps a few billion years ago, as the Earth cooled and the Earth's water vapor turned into liquid water, the Earth was covered with mostly water. Every time this occurs at 12,068 years, the sun doing a mini nova, what occurs is that the Earth gets blasted with a heat wave, it loses part of its water, and it gets pushed a little further away from the sun. And there are cataclysmic Earth changes at the time. During the time of millions of years ago, the Earth was still much warmer. It contained a much greater mass of water across its surface, and the Earth was so warm that all creatures were reptilians. Basically, most all creatures were reptilians. They were cold-blooded mammals, and they can live in the environment at the time because it never froze. But this was millions of years ago. But as the Earth again is hit with this pulse from the sun at a clock cycle of 12,068 years, it becomes warmer and cooler and loses part of its water from the blast of the sun. The pyramids appear to be the leftover remnants of an advanced civilization that was actually destroyed by this. And the common theory is right now that, by many archaeologists, that the pyramids are 5,000 or 6,000 years old. Others will tell you they're 12,000, 13,000 years old, maybe even more. Other archaeologists will also tell you that the casing stones in the pyramids were actually blown off the pyramid, and there's also evidence that the Sphinx located near the pyramids was damaged heavily by water damage, heavy flood damage. This all goes along with the theory of the 12,068 years clock cycle. Doug Voigt actually partly calculated this from carbon dating, where you could see the magnetic reversals were occurring. It could be also the magnetic reversals were also pinpointed not by carbon dating, but also of the organisms that were frozen in time, because some organisms will grow in a certain direction, clockwise or counterclockwise, depending upon the direction, Earth's rotation of the direction of the Earth. Every time this clock cycle hits and this dust shell from the sun hits, it occurs at a time when the Earth is doing its magnetic reversal. In other words, the magnetic reversal of the North and South Pole. When this occurs, the direction of the Earth's rotation changes. While the magnetic field is being diminished, and actually right now we can see that scientists are saying our magnetic pole is moving towards Siberia and the magnetic strength is diminishing. This is not just something that's going to affect navigation or compasses or just maybe electronics, it's actually going to affect the entire Earth, because what happens during these reversals is that the Earth actually reverses orbit. Now, the Earth at the equator, while it's spinning, although nobody realizes it because of gravity, is actually moving at 1,000 miles an hour. So if the Earth's direction changes inside of a day or two, you have 1,000 miles an hour one way and 1,000 miles the other way. But what happens is that the oceans will ride up over the continental shelf and wipe things out. Now, another aspect that Doug Voigt brought up is that the side of the Earth that gets hit with the mini nova from the sun, everything is incinerated, but the opposite side of the Earth, the atmosphere is pushed over from the side of the Earth that get hit by the sun, and then the atmosphere is actually pushed over to the opposite side of the Earth, and the opposite side of the Earth with the compressed atmosphere will lower the temperature drastically by many, many, many dozens of degrees. This is why there were woolly mammoths found flash frozen in Siberia, and I'm not talking just a few of them, many, many of them. There was actually a big industry up till maybe 100 years ago or so, whereby people in Siberia were selling ivory from the tusk of prehistoric woolly mammoths. They were flash frozen in ice at a time when Siberia was before this mini nova and Earth reversal and nova from the sun occurred. That part of Siberia was actually a lush jungle. The woolly mammoths actually still contained vegetation in their stomach from a jungle environment. And since they were flash frozen, they used to feed the sled dogs, which now became frozen. In other words, the Earth's equator must have changed also. They used to feed the sled dogs the meat from the woolly mammoths up to about 100 years ago or so. So that's just fairly modern times, though. It's not even a bygone theory. It's something that's been proven, that woolly mammoths were flash frozen in Siberia. And Siberia used to be a lush green jungle environment because the woolly mammoths had lush green jungle vegetation in their stomach. This was all caused at the time of the magnetic reversal. The mini nova from the sun, the mini nova of the sun hits one side of the Earth, incinerates everything, pushes the atmosphere to the opposite side of the Earth, most of the atmosphere, and the compression of the atmosphere, just as your air conditioning works, super cools the other side of the Earth and causes flash freezing. Now, another side of it aspect is that when the Earth's rotation is reversing during this time, if you look at these deep chasms, and this has actually gone over in Doug Voigt's videos, these deep chasms in the trenches and canyons in the bottom of the ocean floor, this is when they were occurred, when the water was running out from the ocean. This happened over basically billions of years. So if you're talking, a million years, you're talking, if this happens every 12,000 years, I guess that's 80 or so cycles. You're talking 10 million, it's 800 cycles. So, but my theory, my conjecture is this, that since there's less water on this Earth than there was millions and billions of years ago, I think millions and billions of years ago is when these canyons were formed. I don't know if the entire ocean is going to empty out and go over land, because there is a lot less water today than there was, many millions of years ago. And also, as another aspect of this, I also want to point out that in our actual historic times, the times that we have recorded history, we have 30 days on an average in a month, and 12 months in a year, but some months have 31 days because we have 365 and a quarter days in a year, right? During recorded history, the Earth used to have 360 days in a year, not 365, which shows that the Earth is actually moving further and further away from the sun. If you look at Mars, it's 687 days for a year, and Venus is, I think, less than that. So, the other aspect of this is that a chasm is going to develop from the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes are going to flow into the Gulf Stream of Mexico. Now, that's not Doug Voigt's theory exactly, but that is what Edgar Cayce has been saying. And a lot of times, since everybody has been focused in on his year 2012, and if you remember, there was a movie out 2012. A lot of times the movies are taking things from, maybe exaggerating, but they're taking things from some of these theories that are out there, and I don't think this is much of a theory. I think it's an actual fact. This thing is coming, and he has estimated that the year will be pinpointed sometime between September and November of 2046. So what would happen during this time is actually all the major cities of the East Coast and West Coast, and much of the population of the world will be wiped out, because most of the population of the world lives near the coast. On top of this, we're going to have rapid changes in our environment. It may be, I know the Diehold Foundation doesn't mention this, but it may be that the equator is going to be in a different place. But I know one thing: anywhere in the world that you live near a coast, it's going to be wiped out, because the coast, if the oceans are moving away from you due to the direction of the change of the Earth, they're going to come back with a almost equal force and wipe you out. It's not just going to be an ordinary tidal wave; it's going to be the whole entire ocean moving. Now, here I'm showing a solar flare, but a solar flare is actually extremely minor compared to the sun doing a mini nova. And they has found, the Diehold Foundation has pointed out that this mini nova has been proven to occur because what happens is with sand, it turns into green glass beads. I know there's been theories out there on the internet or for other people that are saying that there were ancient atomic blasts, that there must have been ancient astronauts or aliens doing atomic blasts. Well, it appears that the reason why because the only time this green glass they ever found it to happen in modern times was during nuclear testing in New Mexico. But this green glass was found not just all over the world, but also on the moon and on Mars. And green glass was not due to atomic explosions. It was from the superheating from the sun doing a mini nova that hit all the planets in the solar system. It's only on one side of the moon, for instance. They took moon samples. So, what's going to occur this time? It depends on where the nova hits. If the nova hits mainly over land, it's going to, well, no matter what, it's going to usher in a new major ice age. But if it hits the Pacific Ocean, what happens is the nova superheats the water, evaporates whatever mega amounts of water into the atmosphere. So the superheated ball hits one side of the Earth, compresses the atmosphere on the opposite side of the Earth, and that causes instant cooling. But what causes the major ice age to occur for the next centuries and thousands of years is that it evaporates the superheated mini nova from the sun, evaporates mega amounts of water. Actually, we lose some water, maybe 8-10 feet of water off the height of the ocean, evaporates all this water, and we actually lose some of it to the atmosphere because of the force of the mini nova. But then evaporates this water. We have cloud cover across the entire Earth, thick vaporized cloud cover, which blocks out the heat and light rays of the sun, which warms the Earth. So we have mega continuous snow, like many feet every single day. And this is how, like, Seattle and New York City in ancient prehistoric times was covered with miles of ice. It actually occurred, they know it occurred over a 20-30 year period, and this is why. What may happen in the future is that we might have to go, this is, we'd be talking eons from now. Eventually, we might have to go to Venus. The human race may actually be somehow descendants from People that lived in Mars. Mars used to have water, rivers. It was a habitable planet. They found pyramids on Mars. And eventually Mars lost all its water, basically from this reoccurring 12,068 year cycle. And eventually this is going to happen to Earth. And, if our descendants are still around, we'll have to move to Venus. But what's interesting about this is coming up, tomorrow, but I know, it's maybe somebody thinking that's another 20 scare tactic, but I don't think so. And I'm not sure if it's going to be, I wouldn't really know. How would you know how cataclysmic it would be? How would you know? It's impossible to notice. You would never know, and you would never know exactly what would happen. Now, in the United States, though, it appears that maybe our government does know something. Because, there's been a lot of maps and things out there that have been released by people that say there's a lot of underground tunnels and caverns and stuff. Is that the answer? Maybe. I don't know. But the trouble is, if you're 2 miles down and you get covered up with 2 miles of ice above you, I don't know how that's going to work either. So I don't think with the government, I wouldn't trust them to have the answers on anything. But, the one thing that's actually going to be the most important thing is rebuilding the human race. And females are going to be the one that's doing that job, that's for sure. It's going to kind of go right back to square one. And, that's the reality of the situation. But it seems that the government does they should know exactly what Doug Voigt knows. Actually, Doug Voigt has mentioned that he was contacted by the CIA. How'd you figure this out? I was like, well, that would be the situation. And I think there are preparations underway for survival of the human race. Now, as far as us, do we have a tunneling machine? Are we going to be underground? They're not telling us anything. I don't really know what the solution would be. It's a ways off. Personally, I'd probably be up there in my property up there in Tennessee at a fairly high elevation. The river, if this was going to occur, the waters would have to rush all the way across the Rocky Mountains. I doubt that would happen, or in the opposite direction, it would have to come back through the Appalachians. I doubt that would happen. But as far as everything else, I have no idea. Would I try to survive this? Yeah, I'd be 90-something years old, so what? No big deal. Anyway, but it's a ways off. There's a lot of things that can happen between now and 27 years from now. But I don't think this is garbage. I don't think this is gobbledygook. I don't think this is fear-mongering at all. And, when you're looking at what Edgar Cayce was predicting, the guy was not somebody that was trying to do this for money. He was somebody who was honest and forthright, and a number of his predictions have already come true. Just because some of his predictions have not yet come true, and it really dovetails into a lot of other things that have been folklore throughout the world. The Mayan Calendar, hey, maybe they're off a few years. I don't know. How would they know exactly? Maybe they were off 30 years when they're talking 12,000 years. What's the margin of error on that, right? Not much, right? Actually, from 2012 to 2046, so they're off 34 years. The margin of error, when you're talking, the percent of error, when you're talking over 12,000 years, they were accurate enough. But it looks like Doug Voigt actually goes into the Torah, how it's actually coded into the Torah, and it comes down and actually has an actual date that's coded in there when you're doing Excel spreadsheets and adding up different things, of October 16th, 2046, which puts it right smack in the middle of the next Gleisberg cycle. There's various cycles. I guess I should mention this. There's cycles within cycles. There's an 11.09 year cycle on average of sunspot activity, and then 8 of those, around 88 point something years, makes up another cycle, and then 136 of those 88 point something year cycles makes up the 12,048, which is the major cycle, the major ice age cycle. None of these cycles are the 11.08 to 089 years. That's not, that could be from 10 to 13 years, but on average it's 11.09. And then you got 136 of those that makes up the 88 point something year cycle. Excuse me, you got 8 of those that make up the 88 point year cycle. Times 136 makes up the 12,048 year cycle. So I think he's absolutely correct, and you know, it portrays and follows also how the world is even known to have developed. The Earth was a superheated fireball at one point in time, basically. It was only had the water was so hot that all water existed in water vapor. The Earth cooled a bit at a time, and the water finally went below 212 degrees Fahrenheit. The water vapor went below 212 degrees Fahrenheit. It became actual solid water. Liquid water, excuse me. And then, as things cooled down more, you had, the age of the dinosaurs, which the Earth was mostly consistent of water. It was a warm, like a steam bed, bath, basically, environment, whereby nobody, the dinosaurs could never had a problem with the Earth ever freezing. So, they could live in the environment. What extinguished the dinosaurs was the next magnetic reversal. Part of it was the damage caused by earthquakes, the Earth's crust moving, and also the water damage from the floods. But also the entire environment got much cooler. So during this next time, and if you look at the windows whereby we were out of 90% of the time we're in a major ice age. If you go back historically, Edgar Cayce, I think, is absolutely 110% right on this. Some of the people that criticize Edgar Cayce and saying he was wrong about these Earth changes and new land masses will form where they were, an ancient that were used to be land masses that were now are underwater will again rise out of the sea, basically hinting at the fables of Atlantis. A lot of these fables aren't fables. People were accurately trying to historically write things down that were occurring, and it's going to turn out that Edgar Cayce is 110% right. But we got a ways off for this, and it's one thing to keep in mind. And as technology evolves, there's probably, not just technology, but also materials and heat sources, ways to produce energy. Because if you had a method to produce energy and it was intact, and a mile of ice started falling in your area, well, you'd have a way to tunnel your way out of it or something, get someplace else or something, whatever. That is the key. That is the key. If you look at how things progressed over the last few decades, things are going to progress further by the time this occurs. So it is probably fully survivable. Anyway, over and out.